Welcome to the Entrepreneur on Campus podcast. Let's go. My name is Matthew Brown. I'm a student, I'm an entrepreneur, and I love learning. I've created this podcast to help you discover hidden opportunities. Hey guys, thank you for being here again, listening to the Entrepreneur on Campus podcast. I'm excited again about this interview. And before I get into the interview, I just wanted to say that so what I've been doing is I've been posting one episode a week, and I try to post it every Tuesday. And so far I've been pretty consistent with that. And that's what I'm going to keep on doing, is just post one interview per week coming out every Tuesday. And that may change a little bit down the road, but for now that's what's working with my schedule and with everything that's going on. So that's what I'm going to keep doing. So I'll tell you guys a little bit about the guest for this episode. His name is David Covey. And David is my uncle. He is the third son of Stephen R. Covey, the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He has vast experience in sales in both the corporate world and as an entrepreneur. After many years as the COO of Franklin Covey, David co-founded SMCOV. SMCOV works with the best intellectual property experts in the world to globally distribute their content through licensing and distribution channels. David also co-authored the book Trap Tales, Outsmarting the 7 Obstacles to Success. David has a wonderful family and continues living life in an inspiring manner, both professionally and personally. I loved this conversation with my uncle David. I thought that his business is very interesting, how it functions. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to apply the same principles into different industries, and there's a lot of potential. And at the end, I actually added just a little snippet extra of me just telling you a little bit more about the interview, because after we finished the interview, I asked him another question and I really liked his response, and so I included that as well. So listen not just to when the interview ends, but listen to that last part, and you'll be able to hear that as well. That is really valuable. So thank you guys so much again for listening to the Entrepreneur on Campus podcast. Enjoyed this interview with David Covey. Today I'm here with my uncle, David Covey. David, thanks for meeting up with me.
Thanks for having me. So excited to be on this.
Yeah, well, I've been able to come and shadow you before and learn about your business, and honestly, I thought that it would be so cool to kind of highlight what you do, because it's pretty unique.
Thank you. Yeah.
So yeah, just to get started, I'd love for my guests to hear a little bit about your background. You could talk about Papa Stephen Covey a little bit, and kind of how your experience has led to you being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, sure. So I am the 5th of 9 kids from Stephen and Sandra Covey. I always say to people that my father had a lot of kids so he could experiment with his content, his training content. Get reactions from the family before he went out to the world.
The test subjects.
Yeah, test subjects, guinea pigs, yeah. And so I grew up, my father was a professor at BYU for 25 years, so I grew up really valuing and appreciating education. And so I went to BYU and got an undergrad degree in poli-sci. And then I wanted to go to top business school, so you got to work for a couple of years. So I ended up working for Procter & Gamble, the big consumer products company, and I worked in sales in Phoenix, Arizona, for a couple of years for doing that. And then I went to Harvard Business School, and then out of Harvard Business School, I went and joined my father's firm, which is called Covey Leadership Center, which is now Franklin Covey. Mm-hmm. So at the time I joined, it was about 3 years away from the merger with Franklin Quest, then became Franklin Covey. So I was with Covey Leadership Center and Franklin Covey for 16 years.
Wow.
And I spent half of that time in the U.S. and then half of that time working internationally. So my international opportunity came after about being there for about 2.5 years. They were looking for someone to manage the Australia office. And so I went down under and worked there for 2.5 years as the managing director for Franklin Covey, Australia. And that was like an amazing experience. It was my first management experience, but it was also my first experience, living and working in a foreign country. My mission, I did an LDS mission to London, England. Mm-hmm. So I spent 2 years doing that, but Australia was an amazing experience. So from Australia, I eventually got involved in Asia Pacific, and then I started to manage the licensees for Franklin Covey worldwide. Licensees are, they're not direct operations. These are companies that represented the Franklin Covey portfolio of training programs. The most well-known of them is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Mm-hmm. So I really learned the licensing business and how to set up licensees, kind of the characteristics of what makes a good licensee. And so I really kind of learned the ropes on how to do that from Franklin Covey. Made a lot of mistakes mm-hmm. and learned a lot of things, but ultimately eventually built a terrific network for Franklin Covey that had 36 licensees in 120 countries worldwide. So that led me to what I'm doing now, which is that I have a global licensing company business that helps intellectual property companies take their program abroad, take their program internationally.
Yeah.
And so I represent about 30 IP contents. I say IP stands for intellectual property contents. Mm-hmm. And I am.
So those are 30 different sources.
30 different companies.
Different companies.
That have, a book and a training program as part of their company.
Okay.
And
so it's all the educational business.
Yeah, it's not in the educational sector. It's in the corporate sector, the business sector. It'd be like topics on leadership, productivity, sales, those type of broad topics. And they provide training to companies, corporations, mm-hmm. businesses.
Okay. And so when they're your licensees and...
those are the intellectual property owners.
Okay.
And they're usually, most of them are in the United States, and they're doing really well with their program and their book, but they want to go global. They want to go international, and they have no idea how to do it. Mm. So they partner with my company, and because I've worked so long in the international markets all over the world and setting up the licensees like I did for Franklin Covey, I am their partner to help them expand.
Because you have the relationships, you understand how everything works.
I have the relationships in these countries, and I know which countries they need to be in, and so I help. I'm kind of like the middleman. I'm helping them line up good good licensee companies.
Yeah.
To represent their brand.
Yeah. So I want to get into that and talk a little bit more, but first I remember a story that you told me that I would love for you to share. It's just kind of an entrepreneurial mindset within a corporate job when you were working at Procter & Gamble with the diapers. Can you tell that story?
Yeah. So when I worked at Procter & Gamble in Phoenix, Arizona, Procter & Gamble has tons of products. So I was in the division that sold soap products, food and beverage, and paper products. Okay, it's about 40 different brands, and the folks at Cincinnati, which is their headquarters, Procter & Gamble is really known for brand management. They kind of coined that whole term, created that whole, business around brand management. So the brand managers for like 44 of the brands that I represented would all send me these binders, here's how to sell, Pampers, or here's how to sell Jif, peanut butter. Here's how to sell Charmin toilet paper, Mm-hmm. So most people would recognize most of the Procter & Gamble brands. Well, one of the brands was called Attends, Attends, which is an adult diaper, incontinent, right? Most people know the other brand that's the competitor product, which is Depends, which is made by Kimberly-Clark. So Procter & Gamble was really trying to kind of cut into the share of Kimberly-Clark's and take business away from Depends. And so they created their own product called Attends. And so it's an adult diaper. And, there's not a big section in the grocery stores. It's usually like 8 feet, so it's not a lot of shelf space. So I thought, I got to figure out a creative way of how to sell Attends. And so I thought, well, the first thing is I gotta try out the product, So I sat there one New Year's Day. We're not talking, number 2, but I had to try out and experiment with the product. Number 1, and it was amazing. The dry weave technology of Procter & Gamble totally absorbed, what was happening and kept it away from my skin. And it's like, wow, this is incredible. So I thought, you know what? This is a good way to just, sell this. It's just to demonstrate its effectiveness. It's such a great product. So I would wear one, and and I would go to the store managers, and I would say that this would be my pitch, and literally it's like a 10-second pitch, and I'd say, look, I'm not going to try to convince you why the dry weave technology of Attends is superior to Depends. I'm just going to demonstrate its effectiveness. And you are going to agree to buy a case from me. Do we have a deal? And I'd put out my arm and wait for them to shake my hand. They would just kind of shake my hand and not, kind of look in disbelief. And I said, look, I have a cup of water here. I'm wearing one of the Attends right now. And I'm going to pour this down my pants, and you're going to see that there's no leakage. And so I would do that, and they would be like, wow, that's amazing, there's no leakage. So it was certainly very creative, because I don't think any other salespeople have ever tried to actually attempt to demonstrate the effectiveness of its product. And so they ended up buying, a case, and I did that all throughout Phoenix. Well, my boss got a call from Cincinnati from his boss, and they were saying, what is going on? What is going on in Arizona? D. Covey has sold more, and they use your initials, D. So D. Covey has sold more Attends than has ever been sold in the history of Procter & Gamble. And so they wanted to know what was happening, and it was me that was going around selling these adult diapers called Attends. Store to store. And I would have to change my diaper after like 5 or 6 visits. It'd get a little bit soggy, and so.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I wanted to hear that story again, just because it's super funny and super creative.
Yeah,
I love that. So I'm curious, during the other corporate adventures that you had with Franklin Covey and just throughout your whole experience, did you experiment at all with entrepreneurship?
Well, I had a lot of entrepreneur jobs. So when I started with Franklin Covey, I was one of 40 salespeople. So that wasn't necessarily an entrepreneur job. That was kind of like learning the ropes and kind of how to sell. But when I went to Australia, I was all on my own, and it was I was the first company expat that had ever done this. So the company didn't know how to, organize things. They didn't even know how to figure out how to pay me. It took them like 2 months to figure out how to pay me. Mm-hmm. So that was a complete, going out.
It's a venture.
Yeah, new venture. And so that was very much of an entrepreneur job. And what I discovered in that job is I really love kind of just being independent, kind of being out on my own and kind of figuring things out. Obviously, the company wasn't new, so it was good to be around with familiar programs and products. But it was totally new working in Australia and managing a small team. I took when I arrived, we took over from a licensee, so we had a licensee business there, and they had done about $2.7 million in revenue, so they were pretty successful. And I took that over, and we had about 15 people, and by the time we left, we were like $7.5 million. And so we grew it from 2.7 to 7.5 million.
Was that a recurring thing, or is that a one-time?
No. So we went from like 2.7, and then like the next year we went to 5, and then the next year we went to like 6, and then we went to 7.5 million.
Gotcha.
So that happened over 2.5 years.
Right.
Is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm curious about. So licensing business, does that mean that they're paying you every year?
Oh, sorry. No, this wasn't a licensing business. This was direct training. It was a direct office.
Okay.
So Franklin Covey Australia was a direct office.
Okay.
So we sold training programs,
Okay.
courses to clients there in mainly Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane, which is 3 main cities on the East Coast. So yeah, that had nothing to do with the licensing business.
Okay. That
was direct. But what I'm saying is that was really my first entrepreneur experience. So I loved that, and then eventually became the VP over all of international for Franklin Covey. And Europe had always been direct. It always had been a direct business, but it never really was successful. And so I said, you know what, let's license Europe. It's crazy that we don't have that. A lot of people said, nah, that won't work. Europeans don't like, gurus and it won't work. And it was totally wrong. It worked fabulously well, and we found terrific partners. That's where I got introduced and work with now with my current business partner, Stephen Mardix. Stephen was originally from France, so he knew the European market really well. He used to be with Door Training, which is a European training company. So I hired him, and he and I set up the whole licensing in Europe, where we had been direct. So we went from about $2 million in revenues and losing money to $25 million and making money, making lots of money. So it was
in Europe.
In Europe.
Wow.
And that happened in like 3 years.
Wow.
So anyway, it worked out really well, and the European business, for Franklin Covey was, took off in a tremendous way. So I'm saying that was very much of an entrepreneur venture as well.
Yeah.
So what I discovered is, wow, I mean, my happiest times at Franklin Covey were when I was kind of more in entrepreneur roles. So I kind of got a little taste of that. But I had worked for big companies, Procter & Gamble, American Express. In between my first and second year of business school, I worked for American Express in New York City. And so they're huge, giant companies, and then Covey Leadership Center was a smaller company, but Franklin Covey was a pretty mid-sized company. At its heyday, we were about 600 million. So it's not a big company, but wasn't a small company.
Right.
So, but I had a lot of entrepreneur roles at Franklin Covey that I really enjoyed. But up till 9 years ago, I had always been kind of in bigger, companies.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you're somebody who's had a lot of experience in the corporate world, and then you decided to go off on your own and start your own company and everything. I'm curious how those first couple months of transition were from experiencing the corporate world, the paychecks, and then going from that to starting a new business.
Well, I had at Franklin Covey like 12 direct reports. I had an assistant. I had a huge budget, for a lot of stuff to do. So going from that to, literally kind of just Stefan and I just being on our own was really, really a huge shift. Like if we ever had any problems, it's like, hey, well, why don't we call someone from IT? It was like, oh, wait a second. We don't have an IT department. We are IT. That's us. And so it was a little bit of a shock on the system, not having, the resources and the people to kind of work with and help with us. So I think that took a little bit, getting used to, and then also going from making, really good salary to kind of not making any salary, at least initially.
Yeah.
For the first couple of years, as we had to get the business started up. So that was difficult. On the positive side, what I loved is I used to have, I would say, a fair bit of clashes with my bosses, not just at Procter & Gamble, but also at Franklin Covey. And not in a bad way, but I was not a type of person.
Disagree with them.
Disagreements, yeah. I was not a person that would be willing to just do something just because my boss said to. If I thought it was a stupid idea, or if I thought that it wasn't going to work or wasn't going to be effective, I would say, I would say it.
Yeah.
And some bosses don't like hearing that.
Mm-hmm.
They're just like, I'm your boss, just do this. And it's like, no, I'm not going to do it. That's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Let me do it my way. Hold me accountable for the results. So, but what I discovered is that when I became an entrepreneur, it's like, oh my gosh, I think I'm more aligned to be an entrepreneur than it was to be a corporate guy. And I didn't realize that until I actually broke out on my own. And I realized I'm not the kind of guy that really likes to have a boss. I like to kind of be the boss. I like to kind of be the guy in charge. I like to kind of set my own course, my own agenda, and do my own thing. And I didn't realize how strong that independent streak was in me until I started my business.
Company.
So I love then and I love now the flexibility of being able to drive, the business and to steer the ship, however, in whatever ways you want. So there's always downsides. Some of the downsides is kind of
pay cut. You don't have consistent,
inconsistent cash flow and worrying about the business and working all the time in the business because it never leaves you. And if you're not working, then your business is not growing. So those are some of the downsides. But the positive sides of running your own business is the flexibility, to do your own thing, the being able to not being encumbered with bureaucracy and having a boss and and the political games. Every organization has it. Yeah. But there's all kinds of political games, that is part of corporate America or any kind of corporate job.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, did you ever feel like it was easier to be more disciplined in a corporate job because you have a set time that you're supposed to be there, you have reports that need to get done, and whereas you go off on your own and it's completely up to you, you hold yourself accountable for how much you work. Did you ever feel like it was difficult to be more disciplined as an entrepreneur?
I wouldn't say so. No, not for me. Just because I was never a stickler on exactly, even at the corporate world, of
obeying everything
because
perfectly.
I had an international job, which meant that a lot of times I was doing calls early in the morning with Europe, and then I would do calls late at night with Asia. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, a doctor that's on call. I mean, it was really long hours. So it's the same now. So from that perspective, it's not really different.
Yeah.
But I like that if I want, I can just kind of set up a trip spontaneously and just say I'm not going to work, Thursday or Friday of next week.
And
I can just do that. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I were in a corporate job, I probably couldn't spontaneously just do that because I would have. I'd have to kind of give more notice about,
plan it out months in advance.
Yeah.
So for people that are aspiring to be entrepreneurs one day, do you recommend working in the corporate world for a period of time, or what do you think about that?
It's a really good question. I mean, because I asked myself when I started my own business when I was 44, so I was like, I don't know, what's that, 15, 20 years into my business. I guess I went to business school and all that, so I really consider my main career starting kind of after business school.
Yeah.
So, been about 16 years being in the business world. But, I mean, I think if you have the bent, I would really look at being an entrepreneur is not for everybody. Mm-hmm. It is definitely, you got to definitely have the stomach for it. You got to have the constitution for it. And what I mean by that is if you like, security and you like having a steady paycheck and, if you have a, $5,000 on your credit card balance and you're freaking out and you can't sleep at night, don't be an entrepreneur, And it's not, there's not a right or wrong thing, but there's some people that are, they're a little bit more risk averse and they're not kind of willing to go into this, world of the unknown.
Yeah.
And a lot of the ambiguities and a lot of uncertainties. So you got to kind of look at yourself. And I know a lot of people that have asked me about whether, they should be an entrepreneur, and I know them, and I'd say, no, you would not be good in this kind of job. And they go, why? I go, because you can't sleep at night with your $5,000 credit card debt. and that's just going to be one of like 20 things that you're going to have, being an entrepreneur. So, so for me, I'm glad I had the experience. I kind of went with, Procter & Gamble was great. It helped me get into Harvard Business School. And then I worked for my father's firm, which I had a lot of passion for, and that was great. And every time I was maybe getting a little stale, I got a new opportunity. So I don't regret any of that time there. And it was the right time for me to leave Franklin Covey and start my own business, even though I was 44, and most people don't necessarily, become an entrepreneur that late in their life. But my father left being a professor at age 50 to start Covey Leadership Center. So he had 25 years. He was a professor.
Did that play a role in you having the confidence to?
Yeah, it played a huge role, because he left when he was 50 and had 9 kids, and I was leaving when I was 44 and had 7 kids. So I thought, you know what?
Younger, less kids.
Younger, and I got a couple less kids. Yeah, I could do it. But absolutely, they gave me a lot of confidence that is something that I could do, because I was inspired by what I saw my father do. So, sorry, long-winded answer, but I would say if your makeup and your constitution around, is more of a fit and align to being an entrepreneur, a little bit more of a risk taker, you like being your own boss, you like having your own company, or you really like ideas and you want to be able to pursue these ideas, yeah, I would do it right out of, in college or right out of college. Why not? I would absolutely go for it. If you have a little bit of runway, when I say runway, meaning maybe you have a little bit of cash, that you can experiment with a little bit, and not so you don't go broke, or maybe if you're not married yet. I always say to people, if I wasn't married, I could literally live on bread and water, and I would.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit harder, when you're married and you have
got to provide quality of life, and
But I don't regret it. For me, it was the right timing for me to go when I went. So just because I enjoyed the work that I had, and I certainly wasn't one that didn't like my work and was frustrated. I always had a lot of challenges and always found that interesting. But I will never, ever, ever go back to the corporate job after tasting
the fresh water.
Yeah, exactly. What does the Nacho Libre say? I want a taste of the glory.
Yeah.
After having a taste of the entrepreneur's life, I could never go back.
Yeah, great. So. That's awesome. So talking about your specific business a little bit more. So can we just walk through the process? Like if I'm a person that I'm a renowned author here in the U.S.
Yeah.
And I've created some programs for companies to increase.
I'll give you an example.
Okay. I'd just love to hear the process, kind of like how it starts and then what you do exactly.
Sure. So many people will probably have heard of this book or brand. It's a book called Getting Things Done, GTD, and it's by David Allen. Mm-hmm. David Allen's originally from Shreveport, Louisiana, but he's lived in California, for most of his life. So he had a terrific book called Getting Things Done. It's around productivity, helping people be more productive in their life, and then he created a training program out of that, that came from the book, and he had a very successful training business in the U.S. Relatively successful, about a $5 million business in the U.S. But he didn't know how to go internationally. And he had a couple partners.
When you say $5 million business, is that?
I'm sorry, $5 million annually.
Okay.
Yeah, on an annual basis. Mm-hmm. So he's had some good success, and he was doing his training programs, and there's a lot of people that loved his content, and he was done a lot of interviews, a lot of business periodicals, and so forth. Very well known. His book had sold millions of copies. Mm-hmm. So he was a really good success, but he didn't know how to go internationally. When we started with him 7 years ago, he was in 2 countries outside the United States. And these 2 countries basically were just basically beat down his door until he said yes. and they were willing to do anything.
Right.
So, but only 2 countries, and we started to work with them and said, hey, look, we can help you.
Did you reach out to him, or did you?
Yeah, absolutely. We reached out to him and we said, we have a lot of respect for you and your brand. And by the way, have you, what's your international plans? Have you gone internationally? And we went down and flew down to Ojai, California, where he lived, and his team, and we basically worked out a deal, that we would be his international partner. Well, here we are 7 years later, and instead of 2 countries, he's in now 70 countries.
How many?
70.
70.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
So we helped him expand to 68 additional countries. We have 30 licensees that we found for him.
So a licensee, is that a company that purchases his training products to use?
So like, I'll give you an example. So like a licensee in Japan represents, so there's a company called Learning Masters International. That's the licensee in Japan that represents David Allen. And so they are a training company, Japanese, owned and managed, and they have about 10 people, and they have about a $2 or $3 million training company.
Cool.
That does $2 or $3 million a year.
Wow. And
they represent David Allen and other brands.
And other brands.
Some of the brands are external brands like David Allen, and some of the brands are their own internal creations, content creations.
Okay.
So that's exactly what you kind of want to work with. So a licensee is usually like $2 to $5 million in revenue. They're not a startup, but they're not a big company.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You want kind of a small to mid-sized company to work with them. The reason why you want that is that they can give you the more energy and time on the brand. They're not overwhelmed with so many different products and so forth. If you go with a bigger company, sometimes that works. When I say bigger company as a licensee, sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. The reason why it doesn't work a lot of times is they have so many different brands that they represent that you're going to just be one of 25 brands, right? You're going to kind of just be forgotten. Whereas if you're one of 3 brands, and you're kind of like one of the main brands, that really makes a difference.
And so when you say that they're in 70 countries and they have how many licensees? Did you say 20?
So some licensees like Japan just represents Japan. We have like a licensee in Scandinavia that represents,
multiple countries.
Multiple countries. Or like our licensee in Germany represents us, and also in Switzerland and Austria. So sometimes you have a cluster of companies. Most licensees will represent like 2 or 3
And does
countries.
he strictly do licensing, or does he also have like his own team that teaches in other countries as well?
Does who strictly do licensing?
David Allen, for example.
Yeah, so basically David Allen has contracted to us, SMCOV, my company, all of the licensing. So anytime there's any interest from people, he will then refer them to us. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and I was also curious about so if let's say that I wanted to use SMCOV and you help me get licensees in several different countries, but I decide, you know what, I speak Spanish, I'd love to go teach my own product in Argentina as well. Can I, do people do that as well? Do they strictly license in other countries, or do they also create their own teams to go teach their product under their own identity?
Yes, there are some companies that do that, yes.
Okay.
And the way I would describe that is that's like having a direct operation.
Yeah, direct operation.
Right? So, for example, at Franklin Covey, they had some direct offices as well, direct operations. So they had, like Australia, my example, that's still a direct operation.
Mm-hmm.
And the UK and Japan, and they have a few countries where they have direct operations. So yes, there's some companies that do that. The good news on that is that if you do well, and you manage the business well, you get to capture all of the revenues and the profits.
And you have more control over the brand.
You can go the other way,
mm-hmm.
to where, you don't have a good year and you lose money.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the challenge with direct operations, is that the highs are highs but the lows are lows. Whereas with the licensing business, what it is that, like this company in Japan that I mentioned, they will then pay a 15% royalty off of all of their getting things done sales. Okay?
Kind of like a franchise.
Yeah, it's exactly like a franchise. Franchise licensing are really kind of interchangeable terms. The only difference is the franchising, and actually we have more of a franchise rather than licensing. But I say licensing because a lot of times people don't understand the difference. But franchising is where you follow the franchise rules and regulations. So there's certain rules and regulations in every country.
Right.
So we follow the rules and regulations to operate as a franchisor. But they pay 15% royalties off of their gross revenues. So let's say that the partner in Japan sells the Getting Things Done program to Toyota. Okay, everybody knows Toyota. And let's say that they sell the program for $10,000. We'll just use dollars since people understand that instead of yen. But so they'll sell it in, obviously in yen, but let's say it's like equivalent of $10,000. So if that $10,000 that they invoice to Toyota and do the program for them, so let's say they do it for 30 people, they will pay $1,500 in a royalty back to SMCOV.
To SMCOV. So what about David Allen?
And then SMCOV shares that
royalty.
Half of that with David Allen.
Okay.
So that's how our business works.
Right. And do they pay, so the licensee, do they pay a monthly fee to have the license? Do they pay an annual fee? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have two types of licensees. We have exclusive licensees. That means they exclusively represent the brand in their country. And for that, they need to pay an exclusivity fee up front at the time of signing. It's a one-time fee.
Cool.
And then they pay ongoing royalties as they sell.
Annually or yearly?
No, whenever they sell. So they
Right.
They typically report every
revenue
month.
Share.
Every month, they will report. We have an online royalty system that they'll enter their sales in, and they'll report what they've done. And then from that, we will create an invoice of what the royalties look like, and we also have an exchange rate calculator that figures out the exchange rate exactly. So yeah, all of our Getting Things Done licensees, all 30 of them, every month report their sales because they're very active and growing and building the business. So it's not just like, hey, I'll get around to selling this once in a while. It's their main part of their business.
Right.
So they're reporting every month their sales, and then we're sending them invoices for the royalties, and they have basically about 30 to 60 days to pay on those royalties.
And so you spent some time to set up the licensing process and everything. What kind of churn do you experience? Do you feel like these people stay with you for a long time?
Oh, yeah. All of them have stayed with us. So like I said, we started 7 years ago, and we have some partners that have been there for 7 years, and some that have been there 5 or 6 years, and some of them have been, a couple years. And we just signed up a couple recently. We signed up a new licensee in Mauritius, of all places, for David Allen.
Yeah.
Mauritius is an island off 500 miles east of Madagascar.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Yeah. So the plan is we're looking at these as long-term partners.
Cool.
Long-term marriages.
Right.
I always say to anybody that we're talking with is that we're looking for long-term marriages, not like Kim Kardashian, like 72-day weddings, or a lot like what you see with the Hollywood weddings. They don't last very long. We're looking for long-term partnerships.
Cool.
The ones
because that's a great system for you, right?
Covey, those partners are still that we set up originally. Both Stefan and I, they're still in place, and they've been partners now for 25, 30, 35 years. So
this kind of business, if you do it right, it takes some traction and momentum to build it, but once it's built, it's very steady.
Yeah, it's very much like being a life insurance salesperson, that is just starting off, say right out of college. They have to kind of build up their clientele and get their network. And it may take them 5 years or 10 years really to kind of
build it.
Yeah. But after they have built it, then it's great. They have this nice network and they can sell, other products and services to that network. So it's kind of similar to what my business is like in that way. It takes a little while when I say takes a little while, I mean, really talking about, 5 to 10 years, ready to set up in this way.
Yeah.
So we have 100 licensees,
Currently.
SMCOV.
Wow.
30 of those are with the David Allen brand, and 70 of those are for other brands. But we have 100 licensees, so that's from 0 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Today it's 100.
And when you find a new person, a new author, or
New IP owner,
guru, right?
Yeah.
Do you go to the same licensees and try to sell them
Yes.
on those people?
Of course.
Too? Yeah.
So yeah.
Is that where most of it comes from? Is that where most of your sales come from?
It's about 50-50. So there are some licensees that represent like 10 or 15 SMCOV brands, multiple
Cool.
SMCOV brands. But when I say some, there's like a couple. And then there's some that represent like 5 or 6, like maybe like 3 or 4 that represent many. So, of course, we always go to those guys. Those guys look to us as kind of the curator of great content.
Mm-hmm.
So they say, we don't have to go to these conferences anymore because SMCOV represents that for us. We know that you will find the best-in-class training for us to represent. So we're always looking or calling you and saying, hey, you got any new brands?
Mm-hmm.
And every year we have about 4 or 5 new brands that we add.
And if it's a pretty prominent brand, then it's significantly easier for you to go and license it in other countries, right?
Exactly, yeah. One of the mistakes that we made early on is initially we signed on with some brands that were not very well known. They didn't really have a successful book, and they weren't really have a big business in the U.S. And we thought that we could just somehow magically, make it happen for that company internationally.
But it's dependent on them already being successful.
And we haven't been able to do that because here's why. The franchisees that we sign up, the licensees that we sign up, here's the questions they ask. How big is the brand in the United States? Tell me about their customers. What do they like about it? Tell me about their book. How many copies has it sold? Is it a bestseller? And if the answer is, it's not, the book hasn't really sold and they don't really have much of a business and they got 2 clients that are really cool, but no, they're like, hey, come to me when you got something that's more of a success story, right? Because you have to, you franchise a system and something that's already successful. You can't franchise a concept. And I think early on, and some of the IP owners that we took on as people to help go internationally, they weren't ready.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with their brand. They could be, very successful. It's just probably too early. So we have a lot of people say, hey, what do you think about our brand? We're very selective. We're very choosy. And most of the time we say no, just because they don't really meet the criteria for what our licensees would look for.
Right, because you wouldn't be able to provide them with the service that you offer, which is to help them really expand into other countries and succeed.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then they'll be like, why don't I have any partners? It's like, well, why don't you have any clients? I mean, it's like, there's a reason why you're not successful internationally is because you don't really have much of a business in the U.S.
Yeah.
And of course, that's just logical. It sounds logical, but
but
I think that early on we thought that we could have the Midas touch with anything.
Right.
And it's not the case.
Yeah, so I'm curious if we can take this. So what you do is you do licensing with IP. I'm curious. Have you looked and seen lots of different businesses that function kind of how yours does, but in different areas, in different fields?
I have not. So I don't know that. I've had some people say, hey, can you help me with my product to go international? And it has nothing to do with the training industry, which is I'm in. So,
but is it a similar business model?
I think there's some similarities. Yeah, absolutely. We're very specialized, and what we know is very specialized knowledge that you can't just read in a book.
Right.
You
have to know the laws of the country.
Well, you have to experience it. You have to have the contacts, and we have really good agreements. That cover all the franchise rules and regulations, and is good. Licensing. Language, legal language. we partnered with the largest firm in the world to help set up our legal agreements, and we partnered with one of the world-renowned best experts on franchising to help us, create this agreement. So we invested a lot of money in that to get it right, and that's important. Is you got to have really good agreements with these licensees. We are the licensor, so the IP owner gives us a license to operate as their licensor for their brand. So we are their international arm for them. So that's very specialized. So I'm sure there's a lot of great options that apply to what we do to other businesses. I just wouldn't know it.
Yeah.
Just because I've kind of been in this
so
very specialized bucket for
Right.
for 25 years.
Right.
The beauty of it is that it's great, and there's no question that we know what we are doing and we can help companies.
Yeah.
And companies realize that. That's why we get more business than we can handle. I guess the bad news is that there may be some other opportunities, adjacent opportunities, but to me that's it's a matter of focus.
Yeah.
And I'd rather stay focused on this and making this.
It's what you guys are good at.
Successful than to try to
jump into
do
other.
a bunch of different things.
I just think it's good for my audience, aspiring entrepreneurs, to hear about this business model, because it can be applied in different fields and industries, right? And
no question about
products. And I just have a friend that was in China a couple weeks ago, and he was just saying that there were so many products that were just so hot in China that have never been introduced here in the U.S. And there's so many opportunities to internationally, show that if a business is working super well in China, then why can't it work in America, or vice versa, right?
Absolutely. That we have, like I said, we have about 30 intellectual property owner partners, that we work with, but about 20 of those are outside the United States. So in other words, their main market is not in the United States, it's outside. And so the biggest challenge that they have is how to get into the U.S. market. So you look at it from their perspective, so they're sitting in New Zealand or the Netherlands or, just a different country outside the United States. And they're thinking, how do I get into the U.S. market, right? And it's very difficult, to get in the United States.
Do you assist with that as well?
What's that?
Do you assist with that as well?
We assist with that, yeah, absolutely. But, so, here's the interesting thing. So outside of the United States, Germany, China, and India, okay, so about those 4 countries, you can go to a country and just go into 1 or 2 cities and capture 80% of the market. So I'll give you an example. If you're going to be in Canada, where do you need to be? Toronto, the main city, and probably Vancouver, in the west. If you're going to be in Australia, you're going to be in Sydney and Melbourne. If you're going to be in England, you're going to be in London and Birmingham. If you're going to be in Japan, you're going to be in Tokyo or something.
Go to the big cities.
What I'm just saying, just by operating in 1 or 2 of those cities, you can capture 80% of the business opportunity there. Okay? You can't do that in Germany. You can't do that in China. You can't do that in India. And you definitely can't do that in the United States.
Yeah.
So you can't just say, well, I'm in New York, so I'm all covered in the United States. Well, yeah, New York's a big place, and
it's almost like you have to hit every
to
state.
But you have got to be in 30 cities, if you really want to penetrate the market in the U.S. That's not the case for most of the licensing that we do.
Interesting.
Okay,
that's cool.
So you look at your country that you served your mission in, Argentina, right? Where do you want to be?
Buenos Aires.
Yeah, that's it. Well, you can just be in that one city and capture most of the business opportunity.
That's intriguing. Cool. Awesome. Well, I feel like I've been able to get a really good picture of the licensing business. So really quickly before we finish the interview, just can you mention what you're doing with Thomas Leland and then also with Trapology?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with Trapology. So I have a book called Trap Tales, and so most of the intellectual property companies that we represent are external providers, like David Allen's getting things done. But the thought was, it's like, wow, this is great. We're doing all this for them. What if we had our own content? And so we have about 4 of those 30 brands are our own content. Mm-hmm. And one of them came from the Trap Tales book. It's called Trapologists at Work. A trapologist is someone who's an expert at spotting and staying out of traps. So we talk about the 7 common modern workplace traps that people fall into. It's a corporate program, one-day program. And so we are now setting up licensees for that brand, which is great because I'm operating as both the licensor and the IP owner. Mm-hmm. So when we collect the royalties, I don't have to share any of those royalties.
Right.
They get to keep all of those. So that's been great. We're in 4 countries now. We're in Singapore and Thailand and Russia and Mauritius.
Yeah.
You always got to have island resort locations, so you can go visit.
So I just want to include one last
about
piece
8 or 9
about the interview that
cool.
was not recorded.
Anyway,
so I ended the interview and then
I'll have the book
continued
linked
asking
up in
a
the
couple
show
more
notes.
questions. And
Yeah,
I've read it.
One
It's
of the
awesome.
questions that I asked
absolutely.
David was,
so that's
if you were to
that's
start
the
over again,
SMCOV,
would you
business.
build
That's
the same
that's just
business?
part of that.
You were to go back 9 years, would you build the
our
same
own
business
content
that
we
you
own,
did,
it's not
or would you
from a
go
third
into a
party.
different
Right.
field?
For
And
the
he
other
said that
business that I have,
he's really happy with where he's at, but
consulting
he would go
business
into a different
that
field.
helps
And the reason
companies
why is because
align their
he realized that he's selling
culture
to
with
poor
their
people,
values.
that people are
So
somewhat
it's just
skimpy
kind of a
in his
simple way of saying
industry.
it. We do a lot of
And he
culture
thinks that
work,
there's a
culture
lot bigger
transformation work.
opportunities when you look
So
at all the companies that are
the main
selling
idea
for
is that
a
bunch
lot of money and
companies, all
everything.
companies
He thinks
have
that
values. Say these are
if
the
he were to
values,
start
these are
over
the things
again,
that are
he would
important
go
to us,
for a
the
bigger
way that we,
opportunity.
our code of conduct, the way we
Just
operate,
because
and so
he's
forth.
somewhat
But
limited
every
because
company
he's
always
trying
has a
to
disconnect
make money
between
from
what they
people
say
that don't
they
have a
value
ton of
and
money.
actually
It's
what their
almost
real
like selling
culture's
to
like.
college students
So
who
we help them align
are
with
the
those
poorest demographic, right?
and
So
that's what we do with that.
going out and
consulting business.
picking
It's a great,
smart
little
and
business that we have as
the
well.
smart
And
opportunity.
you feel like you're doing kind of
has
parallel
a lot of
entrepreneurship
growth
with these 2
potential.
different businesses, or is it mostly
So
just
that was
There's
just
a
one
lot
nugget
of
that I wanted to
connections
make
with
sure
it.
and include
So we
in
have
the
one
interview.
client,
So there's that.
in Thomas Leland that is interested in trapologists at work, and they're saying, hey, can you help us create our own set of custom traps for our company? And we're like, yeah, of course we can help. So so there's a lot of tie over, and some of the licensees that we have with SMCOV are ended up being contractors that are doing consulting work for our Thomas Leland business.
Cool. So they go hand in hand in a lot of ways.
They go hand in hand. It's different. The Thomas Leland business is a consulting business. There is some training involved, but 80% of it is more consulting, whereas the SMCOV is the licensing around training. So they're different, but there's a lot of interrelations as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for this interview.
My pleasure.
I love learning from you, and it's always fun chatting with you, and I love your stories and your enthusiasm for life, and also I really admire how you were able to put in so much time and effort over years when it wasn't as fruitful, and now you're reaping the benefits of that. So
thank you.
Thanks for the example.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
So there's one last nugget that I wanted to include in the interview, which is not an actual part of the interview, but I was talking to my Uncle David afterward, and he was just telling me that I asked him the question, if you were to start over again, would you do the same business or would you do a different one? And he said he would do a different one. And I asked him why, and he said he's super happy with where his business is at and the situation that he's in right now. He's really happy, but he says he looks at other people that have started these massive companies and sold for hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, and he just recognizes that his business model and the industry that he's in, it just doesn't have that same scalability potential that some of these other companies have, and so he feels like he's also selling not to poor people, but that there's less money flowing in his industry. And so that was just a nugget that I was able to kind of get out of that, was go look at the opportunity before you start the company and make sure that it's the size that you want. If you want it to be small, then that's fine. If you want it to be big, then you got to aim at something big, and just be aware of what kind of opportunity you're getting yourself involved with. So there was that little nugget from David. And with that, thank you so much for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed it with my uncle David Covey. It was so fun to talk with him in depth about what he does, and I think that it can be a little bit of a hard concept to understand his business and how everything functions. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity to do similar things in different industries. And so I hope that sparks some creative juices and that you can go out and think about business ideas. And if you're interested in developing a business model like he has, where you can literally generate passive income after you put in the hard work, it's just generated, and it's a long-term thing. So it's a very stable business once you get it set up, and it just does require some upfront cost. But who knows, maybe another industry it takes less upfront cost and it's more lucrative. You just have to understand how the business works, and then you have to go and research and learn about it. So anyways, I hope that this is inspiring you guys to learn more, to take action and take steps in your life towards entrepreneurship. That's the purpose of this. So I hope you guys are enjoying it, and thank you so much for listening. Please share it with your friends, post it on social media, and continue listening. Thank you so much. I love you guys. Have a good one.